Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We're very pleased and excited to see you here today. We hope this webinar will be interesting and you find it useful. This webinar is the first of a series of 3 sessions dedicated to the Pilot Cities Programme and the open call for pilot cities. We're having this session today. We're having another one on next Monday dedicated to the selection process and the selection criteria. And then finally, a third one on the 5th of September, focused mostly on the technical aspect of your application. This webinar is for both mission and non-mission cities, as the open call for pilots is Will, can you please, sorry, technicalities. Will, can you please move to the next slide? It's for both, as I said, this webinar is for both mission and non-mission cities, as the Net Zero Cities call for pilot cities is an open call under Horizon 2020, to which cities from the European Union and the H2020 associated countries can apply. Today, we will cover shortly and briefly the cities mission and the Net Zero Cities project. And we'll spend more time on the Pilot Cities program. We'll share some key information and we'll hope to inspire you with a presentation on the ambition approach and the impact that we expect. Before we move to the webinar as such, please allow me to do some housekeeping. So we all know how this is organized. You will hear a 20-25 minutes presentation followed by a Q&A. Then we'll have a 10 minutes break and another presentation for 20-25 minutes and another Q&A. This webinar is being recorded. Not to disturb the speakers nor the audience, please use the Q&A functionality to ask questions. When you ask questions, please name or rename yourself and include the name of your city and the department that you represent. If this is the first time that you use the Q&A function with Zoom, you can find it on the bar on the bottom of your screen. You can access a special chat where you can type your questions. You can receive written answers, and you can also vote up for questions that you think are relevant to you or just should be answered in the Q&A, the live Q&A. Today, you will hear from Thomas Osdaba, the Net Zero Cities Program Director with EIT Climate Kick. You will hear from me, and allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Joanna Kirinska-Lavena, and I'm a cities lead with EIT Climate Kick for Net Zero Cities. And I will share the floor with my close colleague, Will Wade, designer and producer, innovation grantmaker, king wizard for Net Zero Cities and for EIT Climate Kick. And we are having with us fantastic colleagues from Dark Matter Laboratories, Eugénie Cartron, system designer, and Joost Boinderman, director. There are more of us today here. We have Barbara and Tom from EIT Climate Kick and Sigrid from EIT Urban Mobility, helping in the backstage with the Q&A and the technical support. Thank you, guys. This is a very tough job, so thank you so much for being here with us. Now, without further ado, please let me invite Thomas Osdaba to introduce us to the city's mission and the Net Zero Cities project. Thomas, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Joanna. Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back on with many familiar names and faces and cities, of course, we're both learning about and looking forward to getting to know better through this process. Some of what I want to cover, I think you've probably heard or seen in some form, but I think it's a good way to bring us into this conversation about how this piloting process and pilot cities will be a key part of the mission and one of the priority areas of support from Net Zero Cities going forward. And I'm just going to take about 5 minutes to give you a few comments and remarks around that. So, and I'd like to start by potentially backing up a bit and talking about the idea and the logic of the mission and what that represents. And I think most, if not all, are quite familiar with the work and advocacy around mission innovation as a strategy for Europe that was championed by Mariana Mazzucato and was discussed quite some length at the European Commission before they convened 5 different advisory boards to provide recommendations and guidance to the Commission, which they then acted upon last year in 2021. But the fundamentals of this idea of a mission is to really look at a generational project that's a long-term, very high ambitious objective, one in which not only will it take a sustained level of investment and effort, but it will take a sustained commitment to innovation and learning, because we currently do not know how to achieve the goal that's stated in the course of it. And that's where the innovation component comes really out to the forefront. A couple of points maybe worth adding or related to that. One is from the perspective of cities and climate and the idea of climate neutrality by 2030 for a city. It's absolutely clear that to do that requires us to really help cities work in a systemic way, that even for the most advanced cities working today, there needs to be a way to get beyond sort of the incremental building upon past successes and drawing upon the best practice of others, but to help cities work in as systemic a way as possible, and to drive several aspects of innovation simultaneously. And that includes everything from citizen engagement to governance and policy making, capital and finance work, understanding the context in which we're working, replication and scaling strategies all need to be thought of together, and we need to innovate across all those areas simultaneously. And that's what we're striving to do here. We also will be bringing a very extensive learning program, city learning program, to help share the lessons and insights to amongst all cities, both within the mission, but across Europe as a whole, to learn how to achieve not only climate neutrality by 2030 per this mission, but to help all European cities achieve climate neutrality by 2045, pursuant to the European Green Deal targets. And so that's a key component of that. This obviously has connections globally, given the nature of the issue we're working on, but let's set that aside for now. So there's some fundamentals around innovation, working systemically and learning through the process, how to achieve this over time. Just very quickly, the mission itself was formally launched at the end of September of 2021. I think, again, this is something you all know. Net Zero Cities formally launched as a program to support the mission and support mission cities through the mission platform and the programmatic infrastructure necessary for cities to achieve the mission outcomes. We started work at the beginning of October of last year as well. So we've been working now for about 9 months in this process. We spent about 12 months before that really planning and getting organized to pursue this work and understand how to support it. Net Zero Cities as a consortium to support cities is more than 33 organizations. And I would say comfortably we have probably 150 people working across Europe to help cities in this effort. We know there are a number of elements that pilots are one component of. We have a platform which serves as a one-stop sort of online portal for the cities to come together, get the right information, et cetera. But that's also supported by people in the form of city advisors and an assorted array of experts in various aspects of the work to help the cities progress with their work. We're using a relatively new tool called a Climate City Contract as a key component of helping cities create space for them to develop the authority to act in a way that allows them to achieve the mission, as well as to better organize resources that might be available, whether at the city level or amongst multi-level players like regional and national governments, along with the city, so that we can effectively attract and engage the right kind of public resource or private resources to go along with what's available. And so that's a key feature of this process as well. We're in the process of developing an impact framework and a monitoring and evaluation and learning component. We'll be talking extensively about policy objectives and policy needs at the national level as well as at the European level to support cities in being able to take the actions necessary to achieve net zero climate neutrality by 2030. That's our goal. Excuse me. So I think with that, I will pause and pass it back over to the team to talk about specifically about the pilots and what we're envisioning in this first wave. The last thing I want to say is net zero cities will be continually evolving and adapting as we go throughout this journey along with the cities. We've set up what we understand and have been asked by the EU to set up as a supporting infrastructure and the platform to help cities, but we also know we're going to have to adjust and adapt to how things go. And so our eyes and ears are wide open and very interested in hearing from you as you experience the process yourself so that we can respond and adapt as best as possible. So look forward to the discussion today, and I'll turn it back over to Joanna. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Thomas, for this great opening. Thank you so much. Well, I guess you are ready to tell us more about the Pilot Cities program. So now the mic is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. And thanks, Thomas, for a great scene setter for us. I'm going to try to provide equal amount of context, but more specifically on the program itself, and you'll hear more about the core details, and then later on from Dark Matter Labs colleagues on the approach that we're taking and the design for that. Okay, so what is the Net Zero Cities Pilot Cities Programme? It's a 2-year cascade funding programme financed under Horizon 2020. It's supported by, as Thomas has outlined, the Net Zero Cities mission platform, and we will have a portfolio of pilot cities testing various pathways to accelerate decarbonisation in their cities towards 2030 and beyond. These cities will be targeting key identified city emissions domains and deploying R&I solutions in concert with multiple levers that are available to them and also multiple stakeholders. The overall funding pot for this 2-year program is 32 million for approximately 30 grants, and you can see on the right hand side there how that breaks down into 3 levels or 3 envelopes of funding that we will be looking to deploy through the call. Just to reiterate again, a really important point is that this call, the Pilot Cities Programme, is for both mission cities and non-mission cities, so it is an open call. But the actual program itself and the learning that we can leverage and everything that comes from that and the impact all contributes towards the mission's 2030 ambition. It's one of the major components of the Net Zero Cities projects, which is allowing for the opportunity for the mission to engage with the broader network of EU and associated countries' cities to start their journey or to accelerate their journey towards climate neutrality, testing systematic innovation pilot activities. And of course, it's also a way for the mission cities themselves to practice systems innovation and to inform the development and iteration of their climate city contracts and mission plans. But it is ultimately an approach to practice systems innovation and to deploy best-in-class R&I solutions as identified within, but also beyond the mission platform. But also there's a large emphasis, as Thomas said towards the end of the presentation, on building capability and capacity in undertaking this kind of transformational work at a city level. For example, the approaches or capabilities for financial and investment planning. So how is this different? Well, the application is will be asking you to really think about and understand your barriers and understanding the mandate you have to act in a systematic way across the city. It's not necessarily about specifying solutions at this point, although you may have some ideas, but we're focusing primarily on the barriers and the challenges that you have to overcome. This does give you freedom to position the pilot to focus on the core issues you have in either achieving the mission ambition or indeed your carbon neutral goals if they are not aligned to the mission's 2030 ambition. But we're not being prescriptive about specific solutions, for example. There is space and time to co-create this process and figure out those possible solutions with us in the early stages of developing the pilot, but also throughout, which is part of that wider support of the mission platform. Our aim is to support you to accelerate pathways to deploying multiple technical and other types of solutions at scale across different levers and with multiple key actors across the city. And the work plan that you will work to and submit, and the KPIs or the targets that you will put in place reflect this, that nothing has to be finalized or fixed at the point of submission. The Net Zero Cities Consortium will support you with tailored expertise, and there'll be something on that in a moment. And this gives the mission cities the opportunity to align with the climate city contract process. It's focused on shared learning, capacity and capability building. So that's something really we want to emphasize, that it's not just about the implementation of solutions or direct impact on emissions, but it's about learning as well, about how to do this at the scale that we need to achieve what we need to do. So the Pilot Cities Programme is not just a funding opportunity, it's much more than that. So there are grants, obviously, but each of the pilot cities will have an allocated city advisor, which will support them in the process. That's an important point there, though, that city advisors for mission cities will not be able to draw on their support for developing their application to the Pilot Cities Programme. That's an important point because it is an open call, and we need to make sure that we're not biasing or creating any additional opportunity for any one city. There is a city expert support facility, so that's a fund available to pilot cities to access specific expertise either within the Net Zero Cities Consortium or beyond that field, as they start to identify the particular needs that they have in the implementation of their pilots. There'll be support for monitoring and evaluation. And as I said before, I'm building financial capabilities and capacities to start thinking long-term about investment and how to effectively fund and finance what needs to happen at the city level. There's also support for learning. So there is a sense-making program that will support the two-year program. There's cross-fertilization, so that is sharing across all of the different pilot cities and of course other activities beyond. And there's the city learning program and peer learning. So you can see there's a real emphasis on the learning approach here as well. Joanna, I will pass back to you now for the call information.
Thank you, Will. Yes, I guess it's my turn now to share some details, practical details that you expect from this call, I suppose. So first of all, who can apply? As already said, cities from the European Union and the Horizon 2020 associated countries can apply. This is an open call. There is a threshold related to the number of inhabitants, but the way we framed it probably should be flexible enough to allow you, most of you, to apply, and will probably also meet your understanding in terms of the expected impact. But this will be covered in details next week. I hope many of you will be pleased to hear that we allow a group of cities to apply together. However, we keep the funding limit at 1.5 million, and this cannot be changed for formal reasons. One proposal must contain at least 2 legal entities and must be led by a city. So technically, this means that a city can invite one other stakeholder or other stakeholders or other cities and other stakeholders as relevant to this particular proposal. In terms of the timeline, you've probably noticed that we've published last week, we published the Pilot Cities Guidebook, an inspirational document, and we are going to publish very shortly the core guidelines, including the eligibility assessment and selection criteria. These both documents will be out there to help you prepare your proposals. As already mentioned, we are going to host webinars and can also host ad hoc open sessions or Q&A sessions to answer your questions if we see this is needed. We will also have an FAQ published that we're going to update all throughout summer. The call opens on Monday, the 5th of September at noon CEST. You'll be able to register through the mission portal and access the grant management tool grant management system where you'll be able to create your proposals. You'll be able to start it and save it for later, come back, change it up until the submission deadline, which is the 4th of November at 1 to midnight. Proposals received after this date will not be accepted. We will not grant any extension and won't allow you to change submitted proposals. Therefore, we strongly suggest that you set your internal deadline ahead of this date. The review and selection process will go through from November to January, and your proposals will be checked against eligibility criteria, then assessed by external independent reviewers against assessment criteria in stage 2. And finally, proposals reaching a minimum scoring threshold against specific criteria will proceed to final selection. The details on the criteria and the selection process will be covered next week, and also a lot of details in the call guidelines published shortly. Finally, the decision will be communicated on the 28th of February at the latest. In March, we will proceed with selected pilot cities to the contracting phase, where application will be amended to address compliance and the selection process feedback. In parallel, we will publish the outcomes, make them publicly available. We'll publish the name of selected pilot cities and a description of pilot activities to illustrate the portfolio of selected cities and activities. I think this is, well, I think we have a short slide, yeah, thank you, summing up the date. So the call documentation will be out in June. We'll spend our summer talking to you and making ourselves available to support you. The call will be open on the 5th of September and will close on the 4th of November at 1 to midnight, remember, Cinderella time. Then we'll proceed to the evaluation and the selection, and we'll let you know by the 28th of February what are the outcomes of the selection process. Thank you. And I guess now we are going to take the questions. So I will ask our colleagues from monitoring the Q&A and the chat at the backstage to help us with this. Sigrid, Tom.
Yes. Thanks, Joanna. So I guess there's a question here for Will, but I think you've already touched on the presentation, but it might be useful to just to reiterate it. But among the non-mission city applicants, is there a difference between cities that applied for the 100 climate neutral smart cities and did not get accepted in other European cities? And that this question's sort of repeated a couple of times. Is there any difference for different types of cities, or will they all be treated the same?
Thanks, Tom. So, Joanna, do you want to take that?
You can do it.
Okay. Well, just it's a good question. It's an important one. Just to reiterate, as an open call, there is no differentiation between mission cities and non-mission cities, or those that did apply and those that didn't. The criteria will be assessed across all of them transparently and fairly, and selection on the same basis.
If I may add to that, Will, I'd say technically there are no difference between cities in general. This is an open call. However, I assume it's a subtle aspect of mindset or understanding. I assume that cities that mission cities or cities that apply to the mission may be at a better starting point, but I cannot judge it now. So it's more about the understanding of what we are expecting than a formal criterion.
Great, thank you. Then we've got a question here about the City Expert Support Facility and how much funding is available per city. Would that be one for you, Joanna, or maybe Thomas?
Thomas, are you taking this one, or do you want me to take it?
Oh, go ahead.
There are different envelopes depending on what the needs will be. We don't have these envelopes predefined yet. They are also specified in, like I said, in terms of, do you need a specific assistance that is available only locally? Will you need assistance from partners from net zero cities? So depending on the type and the extent, you will apply for this, but it's not like an open application. This is going to be just a formal process to make sure that the budget available is spent wisely. And at this point, I don't think we can share the amounts that are going to be available because it's much more complicated. And will depend on the needs of the cities. I don't know, Thomas, if you have something to add to that.
Well, I think I just reiterate that last piece, which is the city expertise service facility was designed specifically because it's impossible to predetermine how much support any particular city is going to need, and that we need to have a flexible resource to help with the right expertise at the right time, at the scope and scale necessary. And so there's not a predetermined limit on that. There's not a predetermined you can only use this or this. You know, it's meant to be responsive to need. I think we are going to find that the demand for that resource is going to be substantial, and we'll need to have some mechanism for managing that across the entire 112 cities, included within the mission itself, or in this case, if there are non-mission cities that are successful in securing a pilot in this particular call. So we'll have to manage that process. It is going to be something that will be based on the response to city requests and demonstrated need, but we'll also have to make sure that we don't just exhaust all resources on a simple first come, first served basis, that we'll have to have some mechanism for managing that. But there's no predetermined level of support that any one city might get, or in this case, a group of cities together might get.
Thank you, Thomas. Tom, what's next?
Right. Thank you. So we've got a question here from Project Zero. Can cities from the same country apply together, or do they need to be from different countries?
They can. There is no restriction.
Okay, great. A quick one. So I think this follows on from that as well, and it's just a bit of clarification around that. Does the consortium need to include partners from 3 different European countries?
No, there is no such a requirement.
No, Tom, and just to add to that, I know that was a component of some of the other mission-related calls that were released earlier this year around particular thematic areas like positive energy districts, but that's not the requirement in this case, no.
Great. Okay. So we've got a question here around, I guess this is referring to associated countries, but is the support system also open to cities in non-EU countries?
It's a H2020 call, so cities from country associated under H2020 are eligible. So it's hard to answer because I don't know which country we are talking about, but H2020 associated countries are eligible.
Great. And then we've got a question here from Cork. Will a full Horizon Europe application form / process be required, or is it something lighter?
Well, I guess this one is for you.
Yeah, so we will have a bespoke call application form for this program. It won't be structured, or it won't be Horizon Europe structured. It'll be different to that.
Great, thanks, Will. Okay, so this is a question that says, will there be requirements for match funding? Do we need to have allocated local funding to support our pilots?
No, we don't have a hard requirement on co-funding.
Okay. So I think the next question there we've answered, that's around city groups. So I'll move on to this one. What percentage of the expenditure is covered by the grant, and what are the eligible expenses?
This is the essence of next week's webinar, so please be patient.
Okay, great. Okay, so I've got a good question here from Bod. Can you tell us more about the involvement of regional/national governments? I've heard that it is supposed that there will be dialogues between cities and the national governments, although this maybe does not directly relate to the call.
Well, I guess, Tom, this one is more for you, as it's more about the contracting, I suppose. No, there is not such a thing at the level of the Pilot Cities program as particular expectations or requirement for regional or national collaboration and cooperation with different level authorities. However, obviously, it's always a bonus if this is relevant for the selected pilot activities.
Okay, so I think you've maybe touched on this, but maybe again we can reiterate it. So eligible cities for the call will have a specific criteria. Do they have a specific criteria for population size?
Yes. Like again, more next week, but in short, the threshold is 50,000 inhabitants per application. And there are specific exceptions for countries with less than 5 cities of 100,000 inhabitants.
Great, thank you. So, okay, we've done that one. So we've got a question here. When building investment and financing capacity and capability, we already have some ideas, but can you elaborate a bit on what kind of stakeholders, processes, and organizations for this you envision? So I think this is one for you, Thomas.
Yeah, great, thanks. And it's an excellent question. I think many cities are looking at this particular issue as it goes. Maybe as just a quick point, I would say the Climate City contracting process includes the capital and investment planning element. Through that, I anticipate that being a very effective way to refine and enhance what it is you might envision in this process. This will be happening simultaneously. You'll be working on your initial sort of work on a capital investment plan for the Climate City contracting process at about the time this is open. So there's a good way to advance that conversation internally. What I would say, there are 3 things to think about. One is within city government itself, and potentially even at the regional level, if they're collaborating in this process, what are the capabilities necessary to work with private capital markets to structure capital investment vehicles, or do blended finance and deployment? Do we need that kind of capacity and capability within city government? What will that take? I think the second would be looking at the local capital ecosystem. So who are key financial institutions, both public and private, who have alignment with the objectives that you're seeking, and who can bring various components of funding and or finance to the process. And then the third would be, and this is maybe the most significant, is helping the city understand its role in shaping the market to get to net zero-like outcomes. Many times we can see projects, whether it's an individual building retrofit or deployment of electric vehicle components or other forms of mobility, where we can do some things, but we can't necessarily get to full climate neutral deployment because the market isn't really structured to allow that to happen. And so the city's role in creating policy and shaping the market is going to be another factor there that's going to be critical to bringing not only the capital to the table, but also making sure it can be deployed effectively through a scaled deployment pathway of projects, whether in a pipeline kind of concept or more of a portfolio where you've got multiple projects working together. So we're going to be talking a lot about that in the coming months. So we'll have more conversation on it for sure.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So question here from on the portal. So can I, just to clarify, is the mission portal the same as the netzerocities.app website, or is this different?
It's the same.
Great.
We just provide the link in the guidebook.
Great. So we've got a good question here from Warsaw. Do you have more details about type of projects as initiatives that could be financed from pilots? Is this more consulting support, e.g. gaps assessment and innovation solution, or some feasibility studies, modeling, or more to work on specific technical solutions?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak.
Very good one. Oh, okay. Yes, please take it.
Happy to speak to that, Joanna, but feel free to compliment if you want. I will also be talking more about this after the break, but it's the most important factor to this is that it needs to be that the pilot really needs to be in sync with the core of your decarbonization ambitions. And within that, of course, there are a whole range of different fields that you could, and no doubt, are already thinking about, whether mobility, whether energy systems, whether buildings, etc. And the pilots could be about any or multiple of these fields. And the whole point and ambition is to recognize that there are already many excellent technical solutions out there, and R&I initiatives and evidence from projects and programs partially supported by the EU elsewhere. So really what this Pilot Cities program aims to do is to enable you to look at the structural barriers that have stood in the way or are still standing in the way of you deploying such technical solutions, as Thomas Osterba already mentioned, issues to do with governance, issues to do with financing, issues to do with regulation, and probably combining a series of these structural levers in order to enable you to unlock the technical solutions that so often already exist. So really this is focused on that systemic work enabling you to progress, and that can involve quite a wide range of activities on the ground of the type that you mentioned, right? That could involve business modeling, that could involve governance change, and different activities preparing for that, etc. So we are not prescriptive, certainly not at this stage, about the type of activities that we seek to undertake, but we would like you to steer you in the direction of recognizing it is these systemic factors that are often holding us back from addressing climate goals more effectively.
Great, thank you. So we got a few more questions here. So another question about criteria, but I think that'll be the focus for next week's webinar. Then we've got a question here. What is the funding rate for the pilot cities? 100% for cities, as in other Horizon calls?
I can take that if you want, Joanna. As said before, there isn't any particular co-funding or other funding requirement for this call, so it's 100% grant for whichever actors, including the city, that are budgeted within the project budget.
Great, thanks, Will. And I guess this one kind of builds on the answer that you just gave, but will there be funds available for city advisors / consultants to help the city prepare a strategy for implementing the meeting the net zero city requirements?
For the application?
I think that's the, yeah.
Okay, so as Will had presented the slide, it was in red. No, the support from city advisors is granted once the pilot cities are selected and contracted. This is an open call, so we cannot provide any support to anyone.
Thanks, Joan. And just in case the question was coming from the other side, can the pilot, if you're successfully awarded the funding, can you use that to engage with city advisors or consultants to help you to prepare a strategy?
Oh, from this perspective, you don't need to use that funding. You will get that support from Net Zero Cities, support of the city advisors, and the expert is it's the city expert support facility, so it comes with the grant. So the grant is a part, but it's like a package of support, financial and non-financial support that pilot cities will be awarded.
Great, thank you. So I think a lot of these have already been answered. I think, yeah, so just to clarify from Cork there, which I think you kind of just did, Joanna, but mission cities cannot use their designated advisor to help develop a bid for this pilot call, but if successful with a bid, they can access the city expert support facility for capacity building. So
indeed, none of us consortium representatives is allowed to support cities with their application.
Great. Okay, so here's a good question from Stockholm. Do I understand you right that this pilot city program is to actually approach an issue that the city thinks is most challenging, where we still are not on track, i.e. can it also be the engagement of inhabitants, the ones who are not interested in climate issues? I see Thomas and used to typing answers, but maybe you want to speak to that.
Sure, happy to. And Thomas, please come in if you want to add to it. But I was halfway through typing my my response. Yes, I think you got the spirit and the aims of this Pilot Cities program very well, which is to enable you to explore and test innovative approaches in those fields that you really feel from your city's context are currently standing in the way of you achieving accelerated progress towards your climate goals. So if engaging residents around climate issues is a core part of that, then we would very welcome you sort of articulating that and in the proposal coming up with some potential ideas around that, which then in the context of the Pilot Cities program itself can be elaborated. And again, probably something like city engagement will be most powerfully explored if it is explored together with other levers of change, such as governance and decision-making, for example. But yes, indeed, focusing on what you currently find hardest is a very good starting point for entering this program.
Thank you. Yes, I think, Tom, we can take a few other questions. We have 9 minutes left for the Q&A.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. I didn't realize I was still on mute then for a second. So is it, so here's a question. So is it allowed to finance the pilot project in combination with national funding, provided the total funding does not exceed 100%?
Joanna, maybe I can start on this because I think the question is just potentially a little bit confusing. So is it allowed to finance the pilot project in combination? So the funding is available to the city. If you combine it with other funding, that's awesome. That's not required. If it is used in a way that helps you to leverage that kind of national resource to support execution of whatever projects or portfolio you're advancing, I think that's great. But if your question is allowed to be used in combination with other resources, yes, I think the scope though has to be clear. The outputs, the deliverables, et cetera, have to be clear in terms of what it is you're using this resource for. That's not that different than probably any other grant or funding opportunity that you might find in Horizon Europe. Hopefully that's helpful in answering that question.
Great. Thanks, Thomas. So just a couple of questions around Q&A. So just to reiterate where these were published and how they'll be accessed, and how we'll be developing the questions. I think that's referring to, will we be taking the questions here and putting them into the Q&A? So I don't know if you'd want to speak on that.
Well, we will publish everything that is available on the website and on the mission portal. As I said, we really try to make ourselves available. Obviously, there is a limitation to it. We cannot come and tell you if your proposal is a potentially successful one. This we cannot do. But I think it's a pretty unusual approach that we're taking, having these webinars and also making ourselves available. At the end of the call, you'll see on the slide an email address where you can reach out to us, because we think it's our common goal to have the most amazing portfolio of pilot activities, and we want to make the most out of it and of this opportunity of for European cities. So we will try to make it easy. We have only 2 places where we can publish, but we can also ask our colleagues from comms, I suppose, to share through social media updates like this. The FAQs was updated, and if we, as I mentioned, if we receive a lot of very similar inquiries, we can host another Q&A session just to respond to the questions live.
Great, thanks, Joanna. So this is a good question here. So could you please tell us how, in the period between March and December 2023, how this will be different, or if it will be different, for mission cities selected for the Pilot Cities programs and the ones that are not, particularly in terms of preparing the CCC, support from experts from the consortium, and developing first projects?
So we suppose that for mission cities, it will be an iterative process, because time-wise, the implementation of your pilot activities will come ahead in parallel, but somehow ahead of the contracting process. So the way we see it, the work on your contracts and other mission cities challenges will help you understand and frame your pilot work, and vice versa. The implementation of your pilot activities will help you understand how you can implement your action plan. How the I know the name has changed recently, but I am sorry, I forgot. Tom, maybe you can help me with the name, but I get this, the essence is the most important here. So yes, how this is going to look in practice once you have your contracts, once you have your action plans and investment plans, to make it work, to make it happen in reality. And maybe something that is also worth reiterating. Pilot cities will not only receive the grants, not only support from the city advisors or the city expert support facility, We are also putting in place a special learning program element of the whole big program that dedicated to financial work, acquiring skills and testing capabilities in terms of replication and scaling up and replication of the pilot's activities. So this is how we see it. You'll have the opportunity to test in practice what you're planning for with your mission work. Hope this answers. If not, please just
Can I just add maybe a little bit to that? And some of it sort of will restate what you said, but maybe just from a slightly different lens, because it's I can see why you'd be asking this question. I think first and foremost, different cities are going to be working at different speeds on different activities. And so there's going to be a fair bit of variation no matter what across all the cities. I think having said that, cities that are successful in the Pilot Cities program and our mission cities will be expected to be working on their climate city contract work along the way anyway. And so there will be some, overlap or intersection, if you will, as it relates to this work and how it progresses. In many ways, things may not be that different than other cities, other than that there's funding attached and you've got a scope for being a pilot city that is helping you tackle sort of systemic barriers or what have you. So I wouldn't sort of bifurcate those into two camps that are not at all going to be working on similar activities at all.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So I think if that's if you're ready to move on, I think we've answered most. There's a few more questions in there which are quite technically focused, and I know this will be the focus for next week. So please do join next week's webinar for that one. But if we're at time, then I'll pass back to you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Tommy. Yes, indeed, it's time for a short break. I am aware that we did not answer all the questions, but many, as you said, will be answered next week, and we'll try to take some more perhaps at the end of this webinar. Now, let's have a break for 10 minutes. We reconvene at 3:05 CST, and we'll hear more from our colleagues from the Matter Lab then about what we expect in this call. Thank you. See you soon. Hello, welcome back after the break. Will, Joost, are you ready?
Yes.
Certainly are.
Excellent. I hope now we can go to this inspirational presentation, and we'll take, as I said, more questions afterwards. So please do not despair. We'll answer more questions, of course. But now, Joost, please bring us on the journey.
But before, sorry, yes, just to keep you waiting there, Joanna. Should I just speak quickly to Nadia's question? I think that was highlighted as quite an important one.
Okay, sure. I thought we could do it afterwards, but
oh, sorry. Okay, well, I'll just get it out of the way.
Since you have the mic, go ahead. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry.
We'll keep everyone in suspense just for another couple of minutes. So the question is, how many cities will be selected as pilot cities, and if all the cities in the mission cities will apply and have priority, what would be the justification for other cities to apply? There is a lot of work, and we lead directly with the second chance. Okay, so the first thing to say to that is that mission cities do not have a priority under this call. The criteria will be published, and there'll be the webinar next week, so you can see exactly how that is being assessed. But there isn't any formal priority at all of the mission cities here. It's an open call for any city to apply to. We are looking at giving approximately 30 grants of those 3 tranches that I mentioned on a previous slide, of the 1.5, 1 million and 0.5. There may be variations depending on the type and profile of applications we get. So we're giving ourselves a bit of flexibility in that, but ultimately there's 32 million euros for us to be able to allocate through these grants of different sizes. And in terms of how many cities, well, that will entirely depend on how many multi-city bids there are. So obviously there might be more cities if there are multi-city applications, but there will be approximately 30 grants allocated. So you would say a minimum of 30 cities supported through the programme. Maybe I'll pass back to you now, Joost.
Thank you, Will. And if we move to the next slide, indeed. So what we've done over the last hour is hopefully covering a lot of the basics around the process and the timeline, and indeed some of the technicalities of the call. And hopefully we'll have left you with the impression that this is going to be a distinct process, bringing together a lot of the consortium's expertise in really building on a lot of the existing sort of piloting and call structures already out there, which is hopefully different enough from those existing calls to really add value to what you can do. Amongst other things that were said, of course, is that in many ways we're not going to be very prescriptive about the exact activities you ought to undertake, and give you a lot of freedom to address what are your biggest barriers in achieving climate goals. Of course, there will be some criteria as to the eligible activities, and they will be discussed in more detail next week, as well as in the guidebook and the guidelines, which are about to be published. So hopefully most of your potential further questions will be in those documents, but like we said, the Q&A to this call will also be published. Now, having discussed that, let's focus on the why. When we started, the Commission's aims were explicitly in all this for the mission to support large-scale pilots to deploy systemic solutions, combining different types of innovations to underpin the climate transition. And that really goes to the core of all this, as we have already said. A focus on those things that you currently experience make the climate transition in your city the hardest. Those are really the things that we would love to see you focus on in this Pilot City program. If we move to the next slide. And that is really about thinking through innovative approaches, not single solutions. Right? There have been several calls in the past focusing on single technological solutions, and they are, of course, relevant. But but we want to complement that with a different approach. Because at the end of the day, the main, and these are the words of the mission board, which structured this climate neutral cities by 2030 mission, the main obstacle to climate transition is not a lack of climate friendly and smart technology, but the capacity to implement them, often held back by silo-based forms of governance, traditional city operations, and they cannot drive an ambitious climate transition. So systemic transformation is urgent, and that is also what these pilots are focused on. So we really hope you will take this to heart. And if I look at some of the questions that were asked, we are finding this particularly challenging. Would that be a relevant thing to focus on? Then I think you've got the message, right? So really, this is all about working across different levers of change: governance and decision making, regulation, finance, participation, etc., to accelerate impact in your core emissions domains. And this is a particularly relevant point, which we'll address in the next slide. Virginie, over to you.
So the question is, what does that look like? What I'll cover now will probably feel very familiar to those of you who are already from a mission city, but for the hundreds of you in the room who are not, this is very interesting to highlight. So the idea is that you all have challenges on the table from sectors of emissions that you already know, but addressing and reducing emissions in those sectors is quite hard. And frankly, isolated actions, isolated projects are not enough. And it involves a range of actors across the value chain to reduce emissions in those sectors. And this is exactly with this pilot city program, those significant sectors of emission that we want you to look at. So for example, they might be heating, electricity, transport, waste, management, industrial sector. It might depend on your specific situation, but this is your significant sectors that we want you to be interested in with the Pilot City program. Can we move to the next slide? And so when you have those sectors and you see that single actions are not enough, this is because there are domains that make progress hard. And those domains are structural barriers. They are multi-level administration. They are regulatory or contracting difficulties. They are outdated data capabilities or data tools. They are difficulties in engaging stakeholders like people or local businesses. There are things that you were already asking some of you in the Q&A in the first section. And so those are the type of barriers that we want you to play with different levels of change. Because the idea of the Pilot City program is to have this type of multi-level actions, portfolio of actions that play not only with research and innovation solution, with technical solutions, but also with the complementary actions across finance, business model, across governance and regulation, across capacity and capability, across democracy, participation, social innovation, that can allow you to really create a full pathway. We can move to the next slide and back to Joost.
Thank you. And again, I think we've made this point already, but just we want to step back here for a moment. Let's acknowledge together that there is so much we do not know yet. And even though we know so much about great technological solutions out there, but there's so much what we don't know yet about how to combine these different levers of change. And like was already hinted at in the Q&A, every city has one or multiple domains in which they feel particularly stuck. Right? And I think it is critical to the mission as a whole that we address those domains where cities feel stuck together or alone, and that we enable the Pilot City programs to lead to learning right across European cities, whether they are in the mission or not. Right? That is really the focus. So building and testing these innovative approaches to overcome those structural barriers that you're facing. And I'm going to give a few examples, but I want to be really explicit about this, that's not in any way to guide your thinking in one particular direction, but just to give an indication of the wide range of possibilities. And so some cities might want to, for example, address the governance, regulatory and contracting complexities for enabling multiple large and small scale operators within the energy system to integrate and interoperate around 5th generation heat and power systems, right? Bringing together, therefore, different levers of change, different stakeholders around one particular part of the emission systems. That is one example. Other cities might want to work together and together with national government to work towards next generation regulatory frameworks to give them, for example, greater financial freedoms or indeed regulatory freedoms to address the climate transition across the diversity of cities in a given country, or indeed work with national government and a whole range, for example, of employer and education organizations to look at workforce training and development to unlock the supply chain that is needed to, for example, make certain capital investments in the transition and to enable a just transition that also vulnerable residents may benefit from in particular. So those are just 3 examples. The fourth one, so cross-actor participation and collaborative structures that enable us to think more productively about integrating mobility and other forms of neighborhood retrofit across the city. Again, many different possibilities. And also I want to say that we're not set on these being the only levers of change you can use. These are, again, illustrative. We think these kind of levers change, but if there are others that you know from your experience would be helpful and necessary to deploy, then by all means, surprise us in that context. And I also genuinely want to encourage you to see this multiple stakeholder approaches not as a burden, but as a real opportunity. And it is very clear to most cities that we talk with that there's real limits to what they can do on their own, right? So again, in thinking through your strategic response, what are the stakeholders that would be most productive to bring to the table here and unlock the most added value? It's very clear that for the budgets we have available, you're not going to do a lot of capital works. So it's all about these structural questions. And so which stakeholders do you want to bring to the table, backed by the mission, to unlock these structural conversations and meaningfully progress on them? So that's what we'd love to see. If we move to the next slide. Yeah, then finally, how do we want to work with you? And I'll invite colleagues to come back in if they want to compliment you, because this is my last slide. But really, with the selected pilot cities, after the selection process has taken place and their role is confirmed, we would really want to co-create from the wide range of expertise on this Net Zero Cities Consortium together with you in order to acknowledge and address and work through the potential solutions for the complex barriers that you face. And so we have the City Expert Support Facility. 4-letter acronyms are always tricky, as well as the city advisor, as well as the mission platform there to enable that support process. And at the end of the day, this is all about enabling accelerated learning, both within the cities and across the Pilot City Programme, because if we're really going to accelerate the climate transition, thinking through these structural barriers, we need to learn together. And that approach, as Thomas Osdebaat already mentioned in the beginning, through a MEL framework and a learning framework, will be absolutely at the forefront of our mind. So that said, hopefully this gives you a bit of an indication of the kind of things we're particularly interested in, without being prescriptive, because it's really up to you within the criteria, which are due to be published shortly, to reflect on what you think you need the most and how this can help you. And with that, I hand it back to Joanna, Will, and Thomas for any things they might want to add.
Thank you so much, Joost. Thomas, would you like to add to this presentation?
No, I think as much Q&A and dialogue is better than just talking.
Indeed. So, Tom, I think we're ready for the Q&A. And so much, thank you so much, Joost, again, for your presentation, and Eugenie, of course, as well.
Okay, we've got a few new questions coming in now. We've got one here. Some things are hard to achieve locally. If we find EU legislation policy as an important structural barrier, how would you suggest we work on that in the local/regional city context to set up a pathway for transition? Quite a challenging question. I don't, Thomas, if you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I'll give it a start. I think the short answer, Mikhail, is there's not a simple answer to that question. I think we anticipate there to be quite an abundance of barriers of just the type you're describing. And so one of the things I think we're mindful of, and I'm just going to say this more broadly than try to figure out how to say it in a way that's specific to scoping a pilot, for example. But I think one of the things we're very aware of is that trying to get policy changes, at whether it's at the EU level or at a national or regional level, requires a pretty comprehensive strategy. And there are reasons why those policy barriers continue to exist, even though many of us have been talking about such barriers for a long time. And so one of the things you might envision is really trying to engage stakeholders in effectively coming up with a strategy for such policy change or what have you. We're very aware that's going to be a difficult barrier, and we want to be smart about how we tackle those barriers across the entirety of the mission, as well as helping each city specifically with the barriers that it faces directly. So I don't think there's a simple answer to that, but it's recognized that that's going to be part of the barriers that you'll be identifying and thinking about ways to address those barriers. And we may come back to this a little bit more next week. We get a chance to sort of contemplate that a little bit more. I'll also see if some of our colleagues want to speak to this a little bit more as well.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Would anyone else like to come in on this question from the panel? In that case, let's move on to the next question. So here's one from Brussels, which I can see Thomas is just answering, but maybe we could just to reiterate verbally as well. So I think in a previous webinar, I said there would be city advisors for mission cities. Is it the case that it's just for pilot cities, or do both mission cities and pilot cities get support from city advisors?
So they'll both be supported? Sorry, just for clarity's sake.
Yeah, so yeah.
If you're maybe to elaborate, if you're a mission city and you're one of the selected pilot cities, it'll be the same city advisor. If you're a non-mission city, you'll be supported by but a pilot city, you'll also receive support.
Great, thanks, Thomas. So I think that's kind of to the end of the questions. I noticed there was a hand raised in the attendees. I don't know if I think I can allow you to talk if you would like to ask a verbal question. So let me just have a look here. So I think that's from La Rochelle. I think I should have given you ability to talk if you would like to come in.
No, sorry, it was a mistake from me.
Okay.
Sorry for that.
No problem at all. No problem at all. So I see we've got another couple of questions coming now, actually. So we'll go back to the Q&A. Okay, so we've got here, should cities propose their pilot solutions in the application, or will the solution be created and implemented according to their needs? So that's a good question, perhaps for you, Joanna.
It's an excellent question. And I will try to respond to it as much as I can, because I think it will become more obvious and easier to understand next week when we will share the criteria. We do not expect you to come up with a solution to your problems. We will mostly assess how ready you are to get on the journey that you mentioned. We will work together on the development and the implementation according to your needs. Absolutely. So yes, it's not about totally anything, a blank page, because we need a starting point, but we do not expect, and to be entirely honest, we don't even want to have a clear implementation plan. This is not what we are looking for. We are looking for your barriers, for your challenges, and how we can help you tackle them together.
Great, thanks, Joanna. So we've got a question here with 2 likes. And so can you give a very general outline of what future calls Horizon Europe, not 2020, after this initial 2 years will evolve? I'm not sure how much we can actually say on that, given that the level of information that's available, but Thomas, is that something you wanted to maybe cover?
Well, very quickly. So I can't tell you too much right now. First off, for a couple of reasons. The EU hasn't made a decision on that funding yet. That should be coming relatively soon, and that will enable some planning to happen about what that will look like. It will be Horizon Europe resources. It will be deployed through a framework partnership agreement, which will mean that future calls related to the mission for cities will not be necessarily available to all European cities. It can be focused more directly on mission cities. The only other thing I'd say at this point, given the fact that we anticipate adapting and adjusting as we learn, is the call is unlikely to look exactly like the first call, but rather will respond to what we're seeing as need and so on. And so we'll be tackling that in the coming months once there's clarity about the funding decision itself. We unfortunately can't get ahead of ourselves in that regard, but more information will be readily available. And in fact, we'll almost certainly be discussing how we design future calls with our city panels in the future. So I guess that's what we can say at this point.
Great, thank you. So next question then, will more points be awarded in the case of designing a pilot around avoidance of emissions rather than the reduction of emissions?
Tom, I'm sorry, but these are the questions that we'll respond next week. Please avoid questions on points and particular criteria, because you will probably and hopefully get the guidelines before the call and during the call at the latest, and then we'll be able to talk again about that, because now we are not ready to reveal it.
Great, no problem. So then moving on to the next questions, this is going back to the city advisors and their role, is that will the city advisors then have a full schedule on the pilots instead of the mission, or will you hire more advisors? So I think that's how will the current city advisors interact with both mission and pilot cities?
Is it for me or for Thomas?
I think either of you could probably take on the question, so I put it to you.
Okay, so Thomas, please add to what I
Yep.
say. Thank you. I think we will organize the work together with the city advisors for them to be able to help the mission cities and to assist also the pilot cities. As already mentioned, I think Thomas said that, and I'd like to reiterate, if you're a mission city and you become a pilot city, then your city advisor will work with you on both. And pilot cities being not mission city will get a special assistance. And I mean, to be very honest, do not worry, we will make it work, and we will, the help and the assistance will be provided, and this is already taken into account, and we are well organized to make it work.
I would just basically add, you know, we're having ongoing conversations with the EU and the mission implementation team about the level of support that we think cities are going to need. That's in some ways an unanswerable question in the abstract, but I think we're very committed to ensuring that all mission cities have enough support and the right kind of support to have a chance to succeed. You know, we don't have unlimited resources, but we want to make maximum use of all resources to support cities. So I think we're quite aware of I think the need to be paying attention to that resource need.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few questions left in here, but I think there's quite an old one here, which I think we may have already answered, which is around the how the cities group. So I think we've really dealt with that one. So I'll put that one as being answered. And then we've got a question that's just come in around, this may be one, Joanna, you want to wait till next week to discuss, but I'll just put it out to you anyway. But did you already define a portfolio of solutions? What is the process to be considered as a solution eligible to Net Zero Cities funds?
Thank you, Thomas. It's an excellent question, and it's also part of next week's webinar. We'll be talking about what is eligible and how we're going to assess this. So please be patient. Well, wait till next week.
And I would just add, in addition to talking about what's ineligible and what we mean by that, I think we'll be looking to share information from cities that we can look at and say, this may not be a perfect example of this, but it gives you an indication of what that could look like, right? And that kind of sharing will be the kind of thing that the portal is really set up to enable us to do quite effectively over time.
Thank you, Thomas. And I suppose if necessary, we'll have more sessions, Q&A sessions, to debate what is ineligible, because I think it will be much easier than describe what is eligible. We really try to make it very open to allow you to address the problems that you are having on site in your city and to have tailored pilot activities.
Great. So we've just had another question come in here, which is, can a city be part of more than one proposal?
No. This is, again, something that we'll discuss in more details next week. It's part of the eligibility check. One city, one application, one city, one city, one application.
Great. So if we've got any more questions coming in, or if someone would like to ask a question verbally, feel free to raise your hand. Got a bit more time here. We've got a question coming in which is looking towards the twins. Will you use the content of the Pilot Cities application to pair the twin cities?
Thank you. Very good question. Yes, partly in the call form, we'll ask you a few questions that are not part of the assessment, but that will allow us to make sense of your activities for the twin call and the selection of the twins.
Okay. So please do put, if you have any questions, please do take the chance to ask them now.
Okay, I think there are no more questions coming. Thank you so much for being here today. Oh, yes, another one just came through. Perhaps I've missed it. Yes, it's about the criteria for selection, and the webinar we're hosting next week is about the criteria for selection, the selection process, and about the eligible activities. And as for the timing of the call, I'm just checking. It's at 11, I suppose, Tom, right?
Yep, that's great. I'll just put the link in the chat now as well.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, my Outlook is just frozen. Does anyone have the link to hand? So I tried to.
I think Brooks posted it.
Oh, Brooks posted it. Okay.
She's posted it in the Q&A. Thank you, Brooke.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all. Will, can you please share the last slide with our email address?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, so you can all reach out to us at pilotcities@netzerocities.eu. I cannot promise that we'll respond on the spot because we are still working on the call and we have to cover other tasks, but be sure that we will come back with an answer, and do not hesitate to ask questions that are unanswered in the webinars or the FAQs or that you cannot find online. We really want to be there for you. We will see each other then on next Monday. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the great tech team. And thank you all for being here with us in this afternoon today. And see you on Monday. Have a lovely afternoon and evening. Goodbye.